Sir, this doesn't look quite right. The format's inconsistent, and honestly, the paper texture feels off. I'm sorry, but I can't process this, the teller said, her tone coated in practiced courtesy, but her eyes betrayed a quiet skepticism, as if the man before her didn't belong with something so official in his hands. The doors to Heritage National Bank on Franklin Street opened with a gentle chime, drowned beneath the low hum of noontime foot traffic. Richmond, Virginia, bathed in late summer sunlight, carried with it a sense of calm, an ordinary weekday, an ordinary branch, with tellers smiling out of habit and customers shuffling papers, tapping phones, waiting their turn. Nothing about that day hinted at the storm quietly approaching its epicenter. Master Sergeant Raymond Carter walked in slowly, his gait firm yet touched by the gravity of age. 72 years had etched lines into his face, but his presence still held a kind of stillness that silenced small talk nearby. He was dressed modestly, pressed khaki slacks, a collared shirt tucked with care, and a windbreaker that had known both comfort and duty. No medals on display, no fanfare in his stride, just a man with purpose and a folded check inside his coat pocket. That check was more than paper and ink. It was the result of a 15-year bureaucratic tangle with the Department of Veterans Affairs. Years spent writing appeals, mailing forms, correcting errors in systems that lost his name more than once. It had been issued as retroactive compensation for injuries sustained during a high-risk logistics operation overseas, one he still wasn't allowed to talk about in full. And now that single piece of paper represented restoration, a new roof for the small home he kept up himself, the chance to finally visit his grandkids in Oregon. Dreams modest in size but weighty in meaning. The line inside the bank moved slowly, with soft apologies and shuffled feet. Raymond waited without complaint, his eyes tracing the clean geometry of the floor tiles, the subtle security mirrors, the rhythm of movement behind the glass partitions. When his turn arrived, the digital screen blinked. Window 3, Emily Brooks. She was young, perhaps late 20s, with a smile that seemed rehearsed. An employee trying her best to look confident. Her name tag read, Customer Specialist, and she wore it like a badge of bureaucracy. As Raymond stepped forward, he offered a polite nod. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'd like to deposit this if I may." He handed over the check with deliberate care, along with his driver's license and his Veterans Affairs identification card. Emily accepted the documents, her smile remaining in place but her expression subtly tightening. She held the check up to the light, turned it side to side, then brought out a small UV scanner. Her fingers stiffened as she inspected the watermark, and her brows drew together ever so slightly. She murmured. "This is unusual." Raymond said nothing at first. He had learned long ago that when dealing with authority, any kind, uniformed or not, silence often carried more force than words. Emily tapped keys on her terminal, frowning at the screen. "Sir," she said at last, her tone shifting from cordial to cautiously skeptical, "this check is quite large, and to be honest, the paper feels off. The routing numbers don't exactly match our usual format for federal disbursements. Are you sure it's authentic?" Raymond inhaled slowly through his nose. "Young lady, that is a United States Treasury check. It was issued by the Department of Veterans Affairs after years of review. It is as real as the dollars in your drawer." Her eyes didn't leave the screen. "We do see a lot of fraud these days, and for checks over a certain amount, especially from unfamiliar sources, our policy is to escalate. But this one, it just has a few red flags." "Unfamiliar source?" Raymond asked, voice steady. "The U.S. Treasury is unfamiliar?" His words weren't loud, but something in their gravity made the space around them feel smaller. She blinked, and for a moment her composure faltered. "I'm just saying it doesn't meet our internal verification standards without further checks." Her voice lowered. "We're trained to be cautious." Raymond reached into his pocket and gently slid his VA ID closer. "My name, the payee, is printed here. It matches my license, matches your system, matches the check." Emily barely glanced at it. "Still, I'll have to follow procedure." He could already see the crossroads forming, the path of patience or protest. He chose neither. He simply stood quietly watching. The years had taught him that battles aren't always fought with noise. He didn't yet know that in the next 5 minutes, a silence deeper than his own would thunder across the bank floor. And that what Emily did next, an act born not of malice, but of ignorance wrapped in protocol, would unravel a chain of events no one in that room could have predicted. Emily Brooks didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. But in her eyes, narrowed now, scanning each line of the document, there was something colder than doubt, presumption, the kind that cloaks itself in policy to avoid accountability. She leaned back slightly, adjusted her headset, and said almost too casually, "Sir, per heritage protocol, any financial instrument that appears irregular, especially from a source we can't immediately verify, has to be marked as non-negotiable." Raymond Carter remained still. His jaw clenched slightly, but he said nothing. He had heard lines like that before, from undertrained clerks, from indifferent administrators, from systems that did not see the individual behind the paperwork. But never before had one sentence stood so close to destroying the dignity he had held on to for so long. "I'm going to have to invalidate this check," Emily added, and with that turned slightly to her left, where a tall, boxy shredder stood behind the counter. Quiet, inert, ominously capable. Raymond blinked once. "Pardon?" Emily did not meet his eyes. Her fingers moved with a kind of mechanical certainty. Confidence borrowed, not earned. She slipped the check between her thumb and forefinger and fed it toward the metal slot. Raymond reached forward instinctively, one hand raised, not angrily, just imploring. But it was too late. The machine came to life with a low, grinding growl. In seconds, the check was gone. Confetti. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Raymond stared at the shredder, then at the young woman who had just erased a piece of his life. "You," he began, but the words tangled somewhere between disbelief and fury. "You just destroyed a United States Treasury check." Emily finally looked at him, her tone unchanged. "Bank policy, sir. If there's any doubt about the legitimacy of a financial instrument, especially one of that size, we're instructed to prevent it from being represented. It's a protective measure for both parties." Raymond's voice dropped to a whisper, almost inaudible. "That wasn't a scam. That was my benefit, my right. My name was on it." She offered a half shrug. "Then I'm sure the issuer can send a new one. You'll just need to contact them. And if you'd like to file a complaint, our branch manager, Mr. Whitaker, is available." There was no apology in her tone, no pause for the magnitude of what had been done. The hum of the lobby returned, slightly dimmed by the undercurrent of tension now building like static. A woman 3 customers back leaned forward slightly, sensing something was off. A man near the exit froze mid-text. One of the security guards near the front desk shifted uncomfortably. Raymond stood there, utterly still. Not from indecision, but from a kind of calculation honed through decades of leadership under fire. He had seen arrogance in the field. He had seen it lead to ambushes, to loss, to regrets carved in stone. And now he was staring into the eyes of someone who thought she understood the system because she had read the manual, but never once honored the people behind the process. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped back. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand to see the manager. Instead, he turned away from the counter and walked toward the glass doors, each step slower than the last. At the threshold, he paused, not because of doubt, but because of purpose. Outside, the sun was still shining, ignorant of the storm brewing in the quiet conscience of a nation that had just failed one of its own. On a park bench just a few yards from the entrance, he sat down, reached into his coat pocket, and pulled out a phone that had survived 2 deployments and countless bureaucratic delays. He scrolled through a short contact list, then tapped a name only to be used in moments where the system had not just failed, but betrayed. And as the call began to ring, Raymond Carter looked up at the building behind him, not with anger, but with the solemn clarity of a man who had spent his entire life earning respect, only to be reminded how quickly ignorance can shred it. The phone didn't ring twice. "Office of the Deputy Secretary for Fiscal Oversight, Treasury Department. How may I direct your call?" The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, one that didn't waste words. Raymond Carter spoke with quiet precision. "This is Master Sergeant Raymond Carter, retired. I need to speak with Deputy Secretary Anthony Delgado, It's urgent. Involves destruction of a U.S. Treasury disbursement. Authorization code Sierra Echo Charlie-47. There was a pause, not long, but heavy with understanding. One moment, Sergeant Carter. Silence returned, except now it was different. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was the breath between recognition and response. And within seconds, that response arrived. Raymond! The voice was deeper, more familiar, seasoned by years in both military command and civilian authority. Is that really you? What's happened? Anthony Delgado wasn't just an official in the Treasury. 2 decades earlier, he had been a young Army captain, green and full of questions, under the mentorship of then Sergeant Major Carter. Raymond had helped shape him, not just as a soldier, but as a leader. Raymond didn't waste time with pleasantries. He laid it out. The check, the teller, the shredder, the dismissiveness. He gave the name of the bank, the address, the teller's name, Emily Brooks, and the exact amount of the benefit. He told Delgado, with the same methodical calm he had once used to coordinate frontline supply drops, how an institution had just stripped him of something far deeper than money. On the other end of the line, Delgado's silence was thunderous. "She shredded it?" he finally said, incredulous. "You're telling me a teller destroyed a valid Treasury-issued benefit check based on her gut feeling?" "Yes, sir," Raymond replied evenly. "Where are you right now?" "Still outside the bank, Liberty Square bench." "Stay there," Delgado ordered, now with the full force of a command. "I'm in D.C., but I have access. The regional director for banking compliance in your district owes me a favor, and the head of Treasury's Internal Enforcement Office was my roommate at West Point. Give me 15 minutes. Raymond didn't smile, but something in his posture relaxed. Just enough. "I'm sorry, Ray," Delgado added, his voice softening. "You served with honor. You shouldn't be treated like this. I'll make sure this is handled properly. Personally." The call ended, and just like that, the wheels began to turn. Raymond leaned back against the bench. The sun still warmed the pavement, but now there was a shift in the air. Subtle, charged. People passed him by, oblivious. But inside that quiet building across the plaza, the first cracks were forming in a wall of false certainty. He looked down at his phone, then at the entrance of the Heritage National Bank. His name might not carry weight on paper anymore, but it still carried memory. And memory, when held by the right people, could reach across desks, override red tape, and move mountains. Raymond wasn't seeking vengeance. He wasn't even seeking apology. He was seeking something simpler: respect. And respect, when denied long enough, doesn't rise in anger. It calls for something greater: accountability. It was quiet inside Heritage National Bank, until it wasn't. 5 minutes had barely passed since Raymond Carter ended the call. The mid-afternoon calm broke when 2 unmarked black sedans pulled up along Franklin Street, their arrival neither loud nor theatrical, but purposeful. Their tinted windows reflected the sun, and their doors opened with sharp finality. 4 individuals emerged in coordinated suits, tailored but unadorned, the kind that didn't announce power. They assumed it. 2 entered the building immediately, moving past the security guard with quiet authority. They didn't flash badges. They displayed them, slowly, deliberately. Gold crests that bore the seal of the United States Treasury and the office of the Comptroller of the Currency. The guard blinked, stammered something inaudible, and stepped aside. Inside, Emily Brooks was mid-sentence, attempting to explain to her manager, Paul Whitaker, why she had shredded the check. "I followed procedure," she insisted, arms folded tightly, voice defensive. "It looked off. He was, well, something about him felt odd. You know how scams can look real these days." Whitaker nodded uneasily. He hadn't seen the check, hadn't even met the man she was talking about. But he was already rehearsing his fallback line. "We acted in good faith to protect our institution and its clients." He never got the chance to use it. "Mr. Whitaker? Ms. Brooks?" The voice cut through the lobby with surgical precision. They turned to face a tall woman with steel gray eyes and a Treasury badge clipped to her jacket. She was flanked by a shorter man whose quiet presence seemed to charge the air. "I'm Special Agent Caroline Reyes, Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. This is Special Agent Darnell Pierce, From the Treasury Office of Inspector General. We are here to conduct an immediate federal audit regarding an incident reported involving the mishandling and destruction of a United States Treasury instrument. Emily went pale. Whitaker opened his mouth, but nothing came out. This is a formal inquiry, Reyes continued, her voice a blend of command and clarity. Ms. Brooks, you will accompany Agent Pierce to a private interview room. You are not under arrest, but this is an active investigation. Mr. Whitaker, you will provide us with all transaction logs from the last hour, internal protocol documentation for handling suspicious instruments, and security footage from this teller station. There was no room for negotiation. Behind them, other bank employees froze mid-task, unsure whether to look away or observe. Outside, Raymond Carter remained seated on the bench, his posture unchanged. He didn't gloat. He didn't even glance toward the doors as the agents entered. He simply waited, silent as ever, as the weight of long overdue justice stepped into the room. Behind the glass walls of Heritage National Bank, everything had shifted. The usual rhythm of counting bills and clicking keyboards had stopped. Tellers whispered nervously. Clients stalled mid-deposit. The atmosphere had turned electric, charged by the presence of federal agents moving with calculated precision. In the back office, Emily Brooks sat across from Agent Darnell Pierce, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The fluorescent lights overhead felt harsher than usual, exposing every flicker of doubt in her face. I thought I was following protocol, she said, barely above a whisper. Agent Pierce didn't nod. He didn't comfort. He simply replied, Your bank's policy for suspicious instruments requires escalation to a manager. It does not authorize unilateral destruction, especially of federal disbursements. I didn't think it was real, Emily muttered. The man looked out of place. The paper felt different. I went with my instincts. You went with prejudice, Pierce replied calmly, not procedure. That word, prejudice, landed heavier than anything else. Her expression crumbled slightly and her fingers trembled as she reached for a water bottle she didn't drink from. Meanwhile, in the main office, Agent Caroline Reyes reviewed transaction logs with Paul Whitaker, who was now sweating visibly. His usual managerial polish had worn off under her unblinking scrutiny. You say your tellers are trained monthly on Treasury protocols? Yes, of course, he replied quickly. Then why did your employee not know to verify through the federal check hotline before acting? She asked, flipping through a printed manual. Why is there no record of her consulting you prior to shredding the document? Whitaker opened his mouth, searching for an excuse, but nothing surfaced. Before he could respond, the front door swung open again. A man in a tailored Navy suit rushed in, his phone still in hand. His name was Greg Stanford, the regional vice president of Heritage National, and his expression was a mix of disbelief and barely contained panic. He spotted Agent Reyes immediately and moved toward her with hurried deference. I just received a call from Treasury in D.C. I assume you're the agent in charge? I am, Reyes replied without standing. You're just in time. We're compiling findings for our preliminary report. Stanford turned toward Whitaker, glaring. Why wasn't I notified the moment this happened? Whitaker looked down, unable to answer. Back outside, Raymond Carter remained still on the bench, his weathered hands folded, his gaze distant. He didn't need to hear the conversations inside. He didn't need an apology shouted across the plaza. The balance was already beginning to shift, not because he had shouted, but because he hadn't. And now the system that had once ignored him was being forced, quietly, thoroughly, to listen. By the time Raymond's phone rang again, the sun had begun its slow descent behind the buildings of downtown Richmond, casting long shadows over Liberty Square. He answered without looking at the screen. There was only one person who would be calling him now. Ray, said the voice on the other end, calmer this time, but resolute. It's Delgado. Raymond didn't speak. He didn't need to. The pause was enough. I've just gotten the update, Delgado continued. The agents confirmed your check was destroyed without following proper verification procedures. The teller has admitted fault, and the branch manager is being placed under full internal review. There was a breath, then the part Raymond had been waiting for, though he never asked for it. A replacement disbursement for the full amount has been electronically initiated. It's already processing and will be in your account by end of day. Any fees, if applicable, have been waived. Completely. Your file is being flagged as priority status within the VA and Treasury systems to prevent this from ever happening again. Raymond's grip on the phone didn't tighten. If anything, he loosened it slightly, letting the words settle. Delgado wasn't finished. Greg Stanford, the regional VP, is on site. He's been advised to issue a formal apology, both to you and in writing. You won't have to return to the bank. The agents have your original paperwork on file, and Treasury is preparing a report for internal review. There was a pause, just long enough for meaning to rise in the silence. I know this won't undo what happened, Delgado added, but it matters to me that you know. We take this seriously. You've given decades of your life to this country. The least it can do is treat you with the respect you've earned. Raymond's voice, when it finally came, was low and steady. I didn't need an apology, Tony. I just needed someone to remember who we were, what we stood for. Delgado replied quietly, I never forgot. The line went dead. Across the plaza, through the bank's broad glass windows, Raymond watched as Emily Brooks was escorted from the teller station, her expression no longer defiant but deeply shaken. Agent Pierce walked beside her, not harshly but firmly, the way someone might guide a student who just failed a final they never studied for. Near the entrance, Paul Whitaker and Greg Stanford stood in a tense huddle with Agent Reyes. Stanford gestured with both hands, his voice low, trying to salvage institutional pride. But from the way Agent Reyes kept shaking her head, it was clear. No amount of polished PR could sweep this moment away. For Raymond Carter, it wasn't revenge. It was restoration. He stood slowly, his knees stiff but spirit unbent. He glanced once more at the building, clean, modern, and for a moment deeply human in its flaws, and then turned away. Not with bitterness, not with triumph, but with the quiet power of a man who had waited too long to be seen and had finally been recognized. Raymond Carter didn't speak of the incident again. Not to his neighbors, not to the bank, not even to the clerk at the corner store, who asked why he looked so thoughtful that evening. He simply nodded, paid for his newspaper, and walked home with the quiet posture of a man who had weathered one more storm. That night, the funds arrived in his account exactly as promised. No delays, no complications. The same amount that had once been turned to shreds now reappeared, digitally intact but symbolically restored. He didn't rush to spend it. He took a moment to sit at his kitchen table, surrounded by framed photos of the past, black and white snapshots from deployments, a folded flag in a display case, and a postcard from his grandson with, "We miss you, Grandpa," scrawled in blue crayon. He smiled, not because of the money, but because of the meaning behind its return. Elsewhere, the gears of institutional accountability kept turning. The internal report led to mandatory retraining across multiple bank branches. Emily Brooks's employment was terminated. Paul Whitaker received a formal reprimand that would follow him for years. Heritage National Bank issued a quiet apology online, buried beneath generic PR. But the agents had documented every step. The Treasury seal ensured that behind the scenes, the weight of consequence was felt. But none of that made the headlines. And that was fine by Raymond. Some stories don't need to go viral. Some victories don't roar. They exhale. In a world quick to overlook, quick to judge, and quicker still to forget, the story of a man, a mistake, and a moment of justice reminded those who paid attention. Dignity is not granted by forms or policies. It is earned over a lifetime, and once broken, its repair demands more than procedure. It requires recognition. Raymond Carter returned to his garden the next morning, humming an old military tune as he trimmed the rose bushes. The wind was soft, the soil was ready, and for the first time in years, he felt like something had finally grown back, quietly but completely. This story is a quiet reminder that dignity doesn't wear a uniform. It lives in the actions of those who honor service, truth, and fairness. Master Sergeant Raymond Carter didn't raise his voice, but his integrity spoke louder than any argument. In a world quick to dismiss the quiet and the aged, justice came, not in fury, but in principle. When systems fail, character still stands. And sometimes all it takes is one calm voice, one act of courage, to restore what bureaucracy tried to erase: respect. Let this remind us, Real power lies not in authority, but in doing what's right. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below, and let's talk about what justice truly means.